How much should I rely on the Gospels?
I think you can rely on the Gospels a lot. It's important to understand what that means, and that is that the Gospels do give us an authentic portrait of Jesus and that what it tells us about Jesus is true. However, this does not mean that there aren't judgments to be made about how that portrait is put together. And this is very important because it isn't just a matter of reading one. If you've read one account in one Gospel, you know the event and you've read the story. You have to pay attention to the differences between the Gospels, and you have to make judgments about those differences as well in terms of what's going on. And some of the debates that scholars have are debates about those judgments. Not every discussion is a discussion between a conservative and a liberal about those things. Some of them are really legitimate discussions between scholars about the phenomena, about what really happened and how to make sense out of all the details.
The four Gospels used to be considered as historical biographies. Now we look at them as just theology and not a whole lot of history. In fact, some guys would say it's the creation of the early church. But just because there's theology in those accounts of Jesus' life, does that exclude them from being historical?
No, not at all. You can have history and theology together. Just think of the word perspective instead of theology. What the Gospels give us is the perspective of disciples and those who believe Jesus in terms of what he did and said. And granted, they have a bias, if you want to use that word. They have a prejudice. They are believers. There's no doubt about it. But they are trying to convince the reader this is who Jesus was, this is what he did, and in fact, this is who he is as well in the process. And that doesn't necessarily require a distortion of history to do.
Are there examples in history of that same kind of thing where other scholars just take it as historical information?
Oh yeah, we've got numerous examples. Josephus, when he wrote his works about the Jewish war, running from the Maccabean War all the way through to the fall of Jerusalem in AD 70 and beyond, he has a perspective. He's trying to blame a certain group for the problem. But we recognize Josephus as one of the great historians of the Hellenistic world.
What's the historian's task?
Well, the historian's task is to take the data that he has before him or her and build it into a coherent story. And in the process, he's got to reconstruct. All historical work is reconstructive to some degree. What the storyline is that lies behind the history, what the cause and effects were, who the main characters were, what the reactions were, what the problems were. And it's loaded with judgments. But a good historian can take the data and sift through it and also sift through the quality of the sources and make a coherent presentation about what that history is.